She had no name. No fingerprints. No identity. When they found her body burning in a remote Norwegian valley, every single label had been cut from her clothing. Every tube of cream, every bottle in her luggage, stripped of identifying marks. Her fingerprints had been physically sanded away. For 50 years, she was simply a question mark in a cold case file. And then, in 2024, investigators discovered something that turned a bizarre death into one of the most chilling intelligence stories of the 20th century. The woman with no name might have been a killer. And the people who erased her identity might have been the ones who trained her to take lives. This is the Isdal woman. And after half a century of silence, the valley where she died is finally starting to speak. Let me take you to Bergen. November, 1970. Bergen is a city on the southwestern coast of Norway, a place where the mountains press in close and the rain falls more days than it doesn't. It's a city of narrow streets, colorful wooden houses, and a deep harbor that has drawn traders and travelers for 1,000 years. But beyond the city, the landscape changes. The valleys that cut between Bergen's 7 mountains are steep, forested, and remote. Even in daylight, they feel enclosed, claustrophobic, as though the rock walls are slowly closing around you. Isdalen is one of those valleys. The name translates to Ice Valley, and the locals have another name for it, one that carries centuries of unease. They call it Death Valley. Not because of any single event, but because of accumulation, a slow geological record of bodies found in the rocks over decades, hikers who fell, people who wandered in and never came back. There is something about the valley's geography, its isolation, its silence, that seems to attract endings. On November 29, 1970, a university professor and his 2 young daughters were hiking a trail on the rocky slopes above Isdalen when they smelled something wrong. It was acrid, chemical, the smell of burning in a place where nothing should have been burning. They followed the scent off the main path, pushing through scrub and low bushes, and they found her. A woman's body, partially burned, lying on a rocky ledge among a scatter of objects that made no sense. There were sleeping pills, dozens of them, some scattered on the ground and some partially dissolved. There was a bottle that had contained petrol. There were 2 empty bottles that had contained liquor. And there was an umbrella, barely touched by the flames, standing upright beside the body as though someone had placed it there with deliberate care. The professor gathered his daughters and turned them away. He walked back to the main trail and flagged down other hikers. Within hours, Bergen police arrived at the scene. What they found in those first critical hours established facts that, 5 decades later, have never been satisfactorily explained. Here are the 5 things about the Isdal woman's death scene that nobody, not the Bergen police, not Kripos, not Interpol, has ever been able to fully account for. 1. Her fingerprints had been mechanically altered. The ridges on the pads of her fingers showed evidence of deliberate abrasion, likely with fine grit sandpaper or an emery board. This wasn't incidental wear. Someone had systematically worked to obscure the whorls and arches that would have allowed identification through any fingerprint database in the world. The question is whether she did this to herself or whether someone else did it to her. And if she did it herself, she did it regularly, because the abrasion showed signs of repeated treatment over time, not a single panicked effort. 2. Every label had been removed from every piece of her clothing. Not just tags torn out in haste, the labels had been carefully cut away with scissors or a blade, leaving clean edges. Her dress, her stockings, her undergarments, her shoes. Every single manufacturer's mark, every country of origin tag, every size indicator. All of it, gone. 3. The items found at the scene included an extraordinary quantity of sleeping pills. Toxicology would later reveal a massive concentration of phenamyl, a barbiturate sedative, in her system, enough to be lethal on its own. But the pills were also scattered on the ground around her body, as though she had taken handfuls and spilled them, or as though they had been placed there. The petrol burns on her body were severe but uneven, concentrated on her front torso and face, which is inconsistent with self-immolation, where victims typically sustain burns on the extremities and hands first as they attempt to douse themselves. 4. She had eaten a meal that contained no identifiable fingerprints on the utensils. In her stomach were the remains of a meal, rice and some sort of protein, but no restaurant in Bergen or the surrounding area could be identified as having served her. No hotel room service matched the meal. She ate somewhere, prepared by someone, and that meal has never been traced. 5. Her front teeth had been fitted with gold crowns of a type and craftsmanship not common in Western European dentistry. Later analysis suggested the dental work was consistent with techniques used in Eastern Europe, possibly East Germany or the Soviet Union. This single forensic detail would take on enormous significance decades later, but in 1970, it was simply another puzzle piece that didn't fit any available picture. The Bergen police began their investigation with the body. She was estimated to be between 25 and 40 years old. She had dark hair. She was of average height and slim build. She had given birth at least once. She had a scar on the right side of her neck, possibly surgical. And she was, in every practical sense, a ghost. There was nothing on her body or at the scene that could establish who she was, where she came from, or what she was doing in a remote Norwegian valley in late November. But the investigation did not stop at the body. It expanded outward, and what the police found next transformed this from a bizarre death into something far stranger. 2 suitcases had been checked into the luggage storage at Bergen Central train station. The claim tickets were found in a purse left at the scene. When police retrieved the suitcases and opened them, they found themselves staring at the kind of collection that intelligence analysts trained for years to recognize. Inside those suitcases were clothes, with all labels removed, just like the clothing on her body. There were wigs in multiple colors and styles. There were multiple pairs of glasses with non-prescription lenses. There was a collection of creams and cosmetics, every one of them with the brand names and identifying marks scratched or peeled away. There was a notebook filled with entries written in a code that Bergen police could not decipher. There was currency from multiple countries. And there were several passports. The passports. This is where the case fractures into something that feels less like a crime scene investigation and more like a fever dream. She had traveled under at least 8 different names. The passports bore photographs of the same woman but carried different nationalities, different dates of birth, different personal histories. She had been a Belgian named Claudia Tielt. She had been a woman named Vera Jarl. She had traveled under the names Alexia Zarnamerches, Genevieve Lancier, Claudia Nielsen, Vera Schlosseneck, Elizabeth Leenhofer, and Fenella Lorch. Some of these names were partially real, fragments of genuine identities, borrowed and reassembled. Others appeared to be entirely fabricated. None of them could be traced to a real, living person. Using hotel registrations and passport stamps, the police were able to reconstruct a partial picture of her movements. In the months before her death, she had traveled extensively across Europe. She had visited Oslo, Stavanger, Bergen, and the town of Trondheim in Norway. She had traveled to Hamburg, Frankfurt, and Basel. She had spent time in Paris, Geneva, and several other European cities. Her movements were not random. She traveled in patterns, arriving in a city, staying for a few days, then departing for another location, often doubling back or retracing her route. She frequently changed hotels, rarely staying at the same place for more than 2 nights. And at each hotel, she registered under a different name. 3 hotel workers who interacted with her in different Norwegian cities all said essentially the same thing. She was quiet. She was polite. She spoke multiple languages, switching between them with ease, but they could not identify a consistent accent. And she was watchful, not nervous, but alert, as though she was constantly monitoring who was around her and where the exits were. One receptionist at a Bergen hotel described her as someone who looked through you rather than at you, as though she was cataloging you rather than seeing you. The coded entries in her notebook were eventually partially deciphered. They appeared to be a travel log, recording dates, destinations, and abbreviations that matched her movements. But there were also entries that did not correspond to any known travel, dates and locations that police could not verify, meetings or visits that existed only in her private shorthand. The full code was never completely broken. Here is where the investigation, in 1970, began to collapse. Bergen police reached out to Interpol. They circulated her description, her photographs, her dental records, her fingerprints, what could be recovered of them, to law enforcement agencies across Europe. They published her image in newspapers. They made radio appeals. They did everything that investigators in 1970 could do to identify an unknown dead woman. And they received nothing. No hits. No matches. No family came forward. No employer. No friend, no landlord, no neighbor. In a continent of hundreds of millions of people, not a single person recognized her or claimed to know her. She had moved through multiple countries, stayed in hotels, interacted with staff and other travelers, and yet she seemed to exist only in the transactional records of her passage, a signature on a hotel register, a stamp on a passport, a line item on a receipt. Beyond those traces, she was invisible. In February 1971, without a positive identification and with no evidence that directly contradicted the possibility, the Bergen police officially classified the death as a probable suicide. The theory was simple: a troubled woman, carrying the apparatus of some kind of fraudulent life, had gone into the valley, taken a lethal overdose of sleeping pills, doused herself in petrol, and set herself on fire. It was grim. It was unsatisfying. And even the officers who signed off on the conclusion expressed reservations. Because there were problems with the suicide theory. Significant problems. The positioning of the body was inconsistent with the burn pattern. If she had been lying down when the fire was set, the burns should have been concentrated on her back and sides. Instead, the worst damage was to her front and face. This is more consistent with a fire set while the person is upright or with an accelerant thrown onto the front of the body. The umbrella. Found standing upright beside her, barely touched by fire. If she set herself ablaze, how did the umbrella remain pristine and positioned? If someone else placed it there, why? It felt symbolic, deliberate, a staging element that had no practical purpose. The sleeping pills would have rendered her unconscious long before the fire was set. Phenymal in the quantities found in her system would have caused deep sedation within 15 to 20 minutes. If she swallowed the pills and then attempted to start a fire, the timeline doesn't work. She would have been unconscious or nearly so before she could have ignited the petrol. Which means either she set the fire first and then swallowed the pills, an agonizing and unlikely sequence, or someone else was present to start the fire after she lost consciousness. The carbon monoxide levels in her blood were inconsistent with a person who was alive and breathing when the fire started. This finding was noted in the original autopsy but not emphasized. It suggests that she may have already been dead, or at least deeply unconscious, when her body was set ablaze. Which means someone else lit the match. And then there was the smell. A woman who worked at a nearby farm reported smelling something burning in the valley on the night of November 28, a full day before the body was discovered. She also reported hearing what she described as a scream. Not a long scream. A short, sharp cry, cut off suddenly. She did not report it to the police until after the body was found. Despite these anomalies, the case was closed. The Isdal woman was buried in a zinc coffin in a Bergen cemetery in February 1971. A Catholic priest conducted the service based on the assumption, never confirmed, that the style of her jewelry suggested Catholic faith. A few police officers attended. No mourners came. Her gravestone bore no name. For decades, she lay there, anonymous, while the world around her changed. The Cold War intensified, crested, and ended. The Berlin Wall rose and fell. East Germany ceased to exist. The Stasi, the Ministry for State Security, one of the most effective and ruthless intelligence services in human history, was dissolved, and its archives were partially opened. Norway modernized, digitized, connected to the rest of the world through technologies that would have seemed like science fiction in 1970. And still, nobody claimed her. The first significant break came not from law enforcement but from journalism. In 2016, NRK, the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, launched a collaborative investigative project called Death in Ice Valley. It was a podcast and documentary series that aimed to do what the police had not, identify the Isdal woman and determine how she really died. They partnered with international researchers, forensic scientists, and intelligence analysts. They exhumed her body for new DNA analysis. They examined the original evidence with modern forensic techniques. And they began pulling threads that had been left hanging for nearly half a century. The DNA analysis was revelatory. Her mitochondrial DNA profile was consistent with ancestry from Central or Southeastern Europe, most likely a region encompassing parts of Germany, the Czech Republic, Austria, or the Balkans. Isotope analysis of her teeth, which preserves a chemical signature of the water a person drank during childhood, pointed to a childhood spent in an area near the French-German border, possibly in the Nuremberg region of southern Germany. This was significant. It narrowed the search area from all of Europe to a specific region, and it aligned with the dental work analysis that had pointed to Eastern European techniques. But the NRK investigation did something else that the original police inquiry couldn't. It placed the Isdal woman's movements in the context of Cold War intelligence operations. Norway in 1970 was a frontline state. It shared a border with the Soviet Union in the far north. It was a founding member of NATO. Its coastline, thousands of miles of fjords, islands, and remote inlets, was strategically vital for monitoring Soviet naval movements. Bergen itself was home to a major Norwegian naval base. The Cold War was not an abstraction in Norway. It was a daily reality, and the country was thick with intelligence operatives from both sides. The Isdal woman's travel patterns, when mapped against known intelligence protocols of the era, matched the profile of what intelligence services call a courier or contact agent, a person who moves between locations, carries information or materials, meets contacts, and maintains multiple identities to avoid detection. Her elaborate alias system, her coded notebook, her methodical removal of identifying marks, her constantly shifting hotels, these weren't the behaviors of a troubled civilian. They were tradecraft. Deliberate, systematic, professional tradecraft. And then came the 2024 revelation that changed everything. The collaborative investigation between NRK and the Belgian Federal Police, aided by access to partially declassified Stasi archives, produced findings that elevated the Isdal woman case from mystery to something approaching geopolitical horror. First, the travel patterns. When the Isdal woman's movements were cross-referenced with the known operational schedules of Stasi-affiliated intelligence assets operating in Scandinavia and Western Europe during 1969 and 1970, there were matches. Not vague, general similarities, specific, date and location correlations between her hotel registrations and documented Stasi operations. She was in the right cities at the right times, moving in the same patterns as known East German intelligence operatives. The probability of coincidence was vanishingly small. Second, and this is the finding that sent a current of cold electricity through the intelligence research community, one of her aliases, the Belgian identity Claudia Teelt, was used to rent an apartment in Hamburg in early 1970. This apartment, a modest flat in a residential neighborhood, was later identified by West German counterintelligence as a safe house. Not just any safe house. A safe house that was operationally linked to the assassination of a NATO-aligned West German industrialist in 1972. Let me be precise about what this means, because the implications are staggering. The industrialist, whose full identity remains partially redacted in the available documents, was a figure in the West German defense industry with close ties to NATO procurement programs. In 1972, he was killed in what was initially reported as a robbery gone wrong but was later reassessed by the BFV, the West German Domestic Intelligence Service, as a targeted assassination, likely carried out by or on behalf of the Stasi or an affiliated Eastern Bloc intelligence service. The investigation into his death identified a network of safe houses used to support the operation. One of those safe houses was the Hamburg apartment rented under the name Claudia Tielt. The Isdal woman used that name. She rented that apartment. She was, at minimum, part of the infrastructure that supported a political assassination. And the fact that she rented the apartment before the killing took place means she was involved in the planning or preparation phase, not a peripheral figure, but someone embedded in the operational architecture. This does not definitively prove that the Isdal woman was an assassin. It is possible that she was a courier, a logistics operative, someone who secured resources and locations without direct involvement in the violence itself. But it places her squarely within the machinery of state-sponsored killing. She was not a tourist. She was not a confused civilian living under multiple names for personal reasons. She was an intelligence asset operating under deep cover in NATO countries during the most dangerous period of the Cold War. And someone burned her body in a Norwegian valley. The question of why she died, and who killed her, takes on a completely different character when you understand what she was. If the Isdal woman was a Stasi-affiliated operative, her death in November 1970 could represent several different scenarios, each more disturbing than the last. Scenario 1. She was eliminated by her own side. Intelligence services have a term for this: burning an asset. When an operative becomes compromised, unreliable, or knows too much, the service that controls them may decide that the risk of their capture and interrogation outweighs their operational value. The Stasi was known to eliminate assets who were deemed liabilities. The meticulous removal of identifying marks, clothing labels, cosmetic branding, fingerprints, is consistent with a service-directed sanitation of an operative's identity prior to disposal. She wasn't hiding from the police. She was being hidden by the people who controlled her. Scenario 2, she was killed by a rival intelligence service. Norway was crawling with intelligence operatives in 1970, CIA, MI6, KGB, BND, Mossad, and others all maintained active operations in Scandinavian countries. If Western counterintelligence identified the Isdal woman as a Stasi asset, they may have taken action. The nature of her death, the combination of sedation and burning, could represent an interrogation that went wrong, or a deliberate killing designed to look like suicide. The staging of the scene, with the pills and the petrol and the eerily upright umbrella, has a quality of performance about it, as though someone wanted the death to tell a particular story. Scenario 3, she attempted to defect and was caught. If the Isdal woman was trying to come in from the cold, to use the intelligence parlance, and her handlers discovered her intention, the consequences would have been severe. The Stasi's response to defection was absolute. They did not merely kill defectors, they erased them. They destroyed their identities, their records, their connections to the service. A burned body with no fingerprints and no identifying labels in a remote Norwegian valley is exactly what an erasure looks like. Scenario 4, she genuinely did take her own life, but not for the reasons the police assumed. Operatives who spend years living under false identities, constantly moving, constantly lying, constantly aware that they are one mistake away from exposure and death, these people experience a particular kind of psychological disintegration. The identity fractures. The person behind the aliases becomes thinner, less real, until one day they look in the mirror and cannot remember which face is genuine. If the Isdal woman reached that point, her death might have been an act of self-annihilation in the most literal sense, the destruction not just of a body but of every trace that the person within that body had ever existed. Each of these scenarios is supported by some evidence and contradicted by other evidence. None of them can be definitively proven with the information currently available. And that is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire case, the feeling that the truth is right there, just beyond the edge of what the evidence can illuminate, visible only as a shadow moving behind frosted glass. There are details that have never been explained, and that resist incorporation into any tidy narrative. The umbrella. Standing upright beside her burned body. Why? If this was a Stasi sanitation, the umbrella means nothing, it's an artifact left at the scene, unremarkable. But if this was a killing by a rival service, the umbrella takes on a different quality. In certain intelligence circles during the Cold War, the umbrella had symbolic significance. The Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov was assassinated in London in 1978 using a modified umbrella that injected a pellet of ricin into his leg. The umbrella as a tool of assassination became, after Markov's death, a kind of dark emblem of Cold War wet work. Was the umbrella at the Isdal woman's death scene a coincidence? A calling card? A warning to others in her network? Or was it just an umbrella, left by a dying woman who had carried it against the Bergen rain? The scream. The farmer's wife who reported hearing a short, sharp cry from the valley on the night of November 28. If the Isdal woman was unconscious from barbiturates when the fire was set, she would not have screamed. But if she was conscious, if the drugs had not yet taken full effect, or if they were administered against her will and she fought back, a scream is exactly what you would expect. One scream. Cut short. Then silence. Then the smell of burning in the November dark. The meal. Rice and protein, unidentifiable, from no traceable source. If she was meeting a contact, a handler, a fellow operative, they may have shared a meal in a private location before whatever happened in the valley. The meal becomes a ghost of a social interaction, a trace of another person who was present in her final hours and who was never identified, never found, never questioned. Someone cooked for her, or with her, or sat across from her while she ate. And that person walked away into the fog of the Cold War and was never seen again. The coded notebook. Partially deciphered, never fully understood. The entries that don't correspond to verified travel, what were they? Meetings that took place in locations she visited under aliases not yet identified? Communications with handlers? Instructions for future operations? The notebook is a cipher within a cipher, a locked room inside a locked room, and the key, if it ever existed, has been lost or deliberately destroyed. And then there is the question that haunts every investigator who has touched this case. Why did no one come forward? In 54 years, across all of Europe, no person has ever publicly claimed to know the Isdal woman. No family. No friend. No colleague. No lover. No child, and remember, the autopsy showed she had given birth at least once. Somewhere in the world, a person was born to the Isdal woman, grew up, lived a life, and either never knew their mother's fate or knew it and remained silent. That silence is itself a kind of evidence. It speaks of fear, of control, of a world in which people can be made to disappear not just physically but from memory itself. If the Isdal woman was a Stasi operative, her family, if she had one, may have been told she died on a mission, or defected, or simply ceased to exist. The Stasi's control over the lives of its operatives and their families was total. Children could be relocated, renamed, given new histories. A mother could vanish, and the bureaucratic machinery of the state would close over the gap like water over a stone. There might be someone alive today, in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in Russia, who carries the Isdal woman's genetic legacy and has no idea that their mother's body lies in a zinc coffin in a Bergen cemetery, under a gravestone that bears no name. The 2024 findings have not closed the case. If anything, they have opened it wider, pushing it from the domain of local Norwegian police work into the realm of international intelligence history. The connection to the Hamburg safe house and the 1972 assassination has generated intense interest among Cold War historians and intelligence researchers, but the Stasi archives are vast, incompletely catalogued, and in many cases deliberately damaged or destroyed during the chaotic final days of East Germany in 1989 and 1990. Stasi officers shredded documents around the clock in the weeks before reunification, and what survives is a fraction of what once existed. The answers may be in those archives. They may be in fragments of shredded paper that German archivists are still painstakingly reassembling by hand, one strip at a time, in a project that is expected to take decades more to complete. Or the answers may be gone entirely. Burned, like the woman herself. Reduced to ash and scattered in the cold wind that blows through the valleys of Bergen. Let me tell you what the valley looks like today. Isdalen has not changed much since 1970. The trail still winds up through the rocks. The scrub and low bushes still press in close. The mountains still stand on either side, close enough to touch, close enough to feel their weight pressing down on the silence. There is no marker at the spot where the body was found. No plaque, no memorial, no acknowledgement that a woman burned and died here and that her death rattled the bars of a cage that was supposed to stay locked. If you hike the trail today, you will notice something. The valley is quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. There is a difference. Peaceful is the absence of disturbance. Quiet is the presence of something that has chosen not to speak. The rocks in Isdal remember. They have been remembering for a very long time. The locals still call it Death Valley, and they still give it a wide berth after dark. The Isdal woman's grave is in Melendal Cemetery in Bergen. It is maintained, after a fashion. Occasionally, someone leaves flowers, not family, but strangers, people who have heard her story and feel the pull of her anonymity. The gravestone still bears no name. In 2016, during the NRK investigation, her body was exhumed for DNA sampling. The zinc coffin was opened. She was still inside. The forensic team took what they needed and closed the coffin again and returned her to the ground. She went back into the dark, still nameless, still unclaimed. But the dark knows her name. Somewhere in the encrypted archives of a dissolved intelligence service, in the personnel files of an agency that no longer exists, her real name is written down. Her date of birth. Her place of origin. The names of her parents. The name of her child. The dates and details of her operations. The circumstances of her death, whether she was killed, sacrificed, abandoned, or chose to end her own life on a rocky ledge in a Norwegian valley at the age of whatever age she truly was. That file exists, or it existed. It was written in German, or Russian, or Czech. It was stamped with classification markings and filed in a cabinet in a building that may have been demolished, or repurposed, or is still standing, unremarkable, on a quiet street in Berlin or Dresden or Leipzig. And the truth of the Isdal woman is in that file, waiting for the same thing she has been waiting for since 1970. Someone to come and find her. Think about that. Think about what it means to die without a name. Not to lose your identity through accident or misfortune, but to have it taken from you, methodically, professionally, as a matter of policy. To have the labels cut from your clothes and the ridges sanded from your fingers and the records of your existence sealed or destroyed. To become, in the most complete sense possible, no one. Not forgotten, that implies you were once remembered. Erased. Unmade. The Isdal woman was unmade. She was reduced to a body, a set of forensic measurements, a collection of mysterious objects in 2 suitcases. She was filed and forgotten and buried under a blank stone, and the world moved on. The Cold War ended. The wall came down. The spies came in from the cold or didn't. And she stayed in the ground, a footnote in a case file, a curiosity for true crime enthusiasts, a ghost story for the hikers of Bergen. But the 2024 findings have changed the temperature. She is not a footnote anymore. She is a thread, and when you pull her, the fabric of Cold War history shifts and rearranges. The Hamburg safe house. The 1972 assassination. The Stasi travel patterns. These are not small things. These are connective tissue between a nameless body in Norway and the machinery of geopolitical violence that defined the second half of the 20th century. The Isdal woman was part of that machinery. She was a gear, a component, a tool. And when tools break, or become dangerous, or are no longer needed, the people who built them do not mourn. They dispose. They sanitize. They move on. But they don't always succeed in making the tool disappear. Because we're still here, aren't we? Still looking at her photograph, that single surveillance quality image recovered from one of her hotel registrations, showing a dark-haired woman with an unreadable expression and eyes that seem to be looking at something just beyond the camera, something only she can see. Still parsing the fragments of her coded notebook. Still walking the trail in Isdal, looking for answers in the rocks. She was unmade, but she was not erased. The evidence survived. The question survived. And now, 54 years later, the investigation is closer to the truth than it has ever been. The isotope analysis points to the French-German border. The DNA narrows the search. The Stasi archive connection opens new lines of inquiry. The Hamburg safe house links her to a specific assassination, a specific network, a specific chapter of Cold War history. The walls are closing in, not on her, but on the silence that has surrounded her. And somewhere, in a fragment of shredded paper in a German archive, or in the memory of an elderly person in a European city who once knew a woman with dark hair and multiple names and an expression that looked through you rather than at you, the truth is sitting, patient and cold, waiting to be uncovered. She had no name. She had no fingerprints. She had no identity. But she had a life. She had a child. She had a history that someone considered dangerous enough to burn. And the fact that we are still talking about her, still investigating, still refusing to let the silence win, that might be the closest thing to justice she has ever received. The valley remembers. The rocks remember. The rain that falls on Bergen 300 days a year washes over her grave and the trail where she died, and it remembers. The question is whether we will remember long enough to find her name. So here is what I need from you. I have given you the evidence. I have shown you the theories. I have walked you through the valley and the suitcases and the coded notebook and the sanded fingerprints and the safe house in Hamburg and the blank gravestone in Melendel. Now I need your mind. Was the Isdal woman killed by the Stasi to protect operational security? Was she eliminated by Western intelligence after being identified as a hostile asset? Did she attempt to defect and pay the price? Or did she, after years of living as no one, simply decide to stop? To lie down on the rocks of Death Valley and let the fire take everything that was left? What do you think really happened? Leave your theory below.